The first time I noticed something was wrong was when the door to my study clicked shut, faint but deliberate, late one Tuesday night. Claire thought I was asleep, tucked away in the bedroom upstairs, but I wasn't. I had been nursing a stubborn bout of insomnia, pacing the kitchen like a restless ghost, sipping water I didn't need. The sound of the door was odd. My study wasn't her place. It was my sanctuary, a small, book-lined room where I worked late into the night or unwound with a drink and a mystery novel. Claire rarely stepped foot in it. Curious, I walked silently to the top of the stairs and peered down. The faint glow of a laptop screen spilled through the crack in the study door. My laptop. At first, I thought maybe she needed to check something. But her movements struck me as strange, quick, jittery, almost frantic. She typed furiously, pausing now and then to look over her shoulder. My heart started pounding, though I couldn't have told you why. Something about the way she moved made me feel like I was spying on a stranger, not the woman I'd been married to for 12 years. I crept down the stairs, keeping to the edges to avoid the creaks, and stopped outside the door. Through the thin wood, I could make out the unmistakable rhythm of her clicking through emails, folders opening and closing, files being downloaded. I pushed the door open. Claire froze. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard, her eyes wide like I'd caught her mid-crime. She looked at me, then back at the screen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice low and calm. "Nothing," she said too quickly, slamming the laptop shut. I couldn't sleep and thought I'd use my work laptop at midnight? Her hands were shaking. She stood abruptly, brushing past me as though she couldn't escape the room fast enough. "Good night," she muttered. I didn't move. The study smelled faintly of her perfume, something flowery and sweet, but it couldn't mask the stench of whatever she was hiding. It wasn't the laptop that unnerved me. It wasn't even her suspicious behavior. It was the look in her eyes, equal parts panic and guilt. The look of someone caught red-handed. Whatever Claire had been doing on my laptop, it was the beginning of something I hadn't prepared for. The rest of the night passed in an agonizing blur. Claire returned to bed as though nothing had happened, her breathing evening out in feigned sleep. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with possibilities. It wasn't unusual for me to use my laptop for work-related tasks, especially late at night. What could she possibly need on it? By morning, my curiosity had morphed into something more insistent. I couldn't let it go. As Claire got ready for work, moving through the house with her usual efficiency, I watched her closely. She was avoiding my eyes, her movements slightly stiff. I waited until she left. As soon as the sound of her car faded, I grabbed my laptop and opened it. The first thing I noticed was the empty recycle bin. That caught my attention immediately. I never emptied it. I liked having a safety net in case I deleted something by mistake. Claire, however, seemed to have made sure there wasn't a single breadcrumb left behind. Undeterred, I navigated to my email. Everything seemed intact until I checked the sent folder. A handful of emails had been forwarded to an unfamiliar address. My stomach tightened as I opened one of them. It was a report from a case I was working on, a high-profile corporate investigation. The kind of work that required discretion and could cost me my job if mishandled. Why would Claire forward this? And to whom? The email address was generic, untraceable at first glance, an innocuous combination of letters and numbers. But it wasn't mine. I stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity, my brain trying to make sense of it. It wasn't adding up. Claire wasn't careless or impulsive. She was methodical, deliberate. If she'd forwarded these emails, there had to be a reason. I tried to think rationally. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe she'd meant to forward them to me but typed the address wrong. But that didn't explain why she'd been so secretive last night. It didn't explain the guilty look in her eyes. I decided to dig deeper. It wasn't just curiosity now, it was necessity. I began sifting through the browser history, hoping to find something that would shed light on what she'd been doing. It didn't take long. There, nestled among innocuous searches for recipes and workout routines, was something that made my heart stop. A hotel reservation. It was from 2 weeks ago, booked for 2 nights at a boutique hotel downtown. The reservation wasn't in her name, it was in mine. I didn't need to check my calendar to know I hadn't stayed at that hotel. Claire had booked it under my name, and if she was trying to hide it, she hadn't done a good job. The anger came first, sharp and hot. Then came the questions, the doubts. Why would she need a hotel room? And why use my name? I leaned back in my chair, my mind replaying the events of the past few weeks. The late nights, the strange behavior, the way she seemed to be pulling away from me. The signs had been there, but I hadn't wanted to see them. I took a deep breath and closed the laptop. This wasn't the kind of thing I could address with speculation or half-truths. If I was going to confront Claire, I needed the whole story. That night, I told her I'd be working late. I wasn't. I parked my car a block away from the hotel and waited. I didn't know what I expected to find, but the thought of doing nothing felt unbearable. Hours passed. The city lights flickered around me as I sat there, my hands gripping the steering wheel. And then, just after 9, I saw her. She stepped out of the hotel with a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, sharply dressed, his hand resting casually on her lower back. They looked comfortable together, like a couple who'd done this 100 times before. My stomach turned. I stayed frozen in my car, watching as they walked to a nearby bar. They didn't even bother to check their surroundings. She wasn't just lying to me, she wasn't even trying to hide it. The drive home was a blur. When Claire walked through the door later that night, she acted like nothing had happened. She kissed me on the cheek, asked about my day, and went to bed as if she hadn't just shattered the foundation of our marriage. But I knew. And now, so did she. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Claire was still asleep, curled up on her side of the bed, her hair spilling over her face. For a moment, I stared at her, trying to reconcile the woman I had loved for over a decade with the one I had seen walking out of that hotel with another man. The decision was clear, I couldn't let this go unaddressed. By the time she woke up, I was sitting in the living room, waiting. The laptop was on the coffee table, along with printouts of the forwarded emails, the hotel reservation, and a few other details I had managed to piece together. I wasn't going to yell or accuse blindly. I was going to present the facts and demand answers. Claire emerged from the bedroom, dressed casually in sweatpants and one of her old university sweatshirts. She stopped when she saw me sitting there, her eyes flicking to the table and the papers spread across it. "What's all this?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I picked up the printout of the hotel reservation and held it up for her to see. "Do you want to explain this?" She froze. Her lips parted slightly as if she was about to speak, but no sound came out. Her hands fidgeted with the hem of her sweatshirt. "It's a hotel reservation," I continued, keeping my voice steady. "Booked under my name, but I've never been to this hotel." "You have, though. I saw you last night." Her face drained of color. She sank into the armchair opposite me, her movements slow and deliberate, like someone bracing for impact. "Who is he?" I asked. At first, she didn't respond. She just stared at her hands, her chest rising and falling in uneven breaths. "Claire," I pressed, my voice sharper now. "Who is he?" Her eyes darted to mine, and I saw something I hadn't expected: fear. "It's not what you think," she said finally. "Then explain it to me." She hesitated, and in that moment, I knew whatever she was about to say wasn't the whole truth. "His name is Eric," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's someone I met through work." I clenched my fists, trying to keep my composure. "And you decided to meet this someone at a hotel? To do what, exactly? Talk about work?" "It wasn't like that," she insisted, her tone defensive now. "We've been working on a project together, and things got complicated." "Complicated?" I repeated, my voice rising. "That's what you're calling it?" Claire's gaze dropped again, and she bit her lip. "I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did." I laughed bitterly. That's your excuse? It just happened? You didn't trip and fall into an affair, Claire. This wasn't an accident. You made choices. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to let her deflect with emotion. How long? I demanded. What? How long has this been going on? She hesitated again, and the silence stretched between us like a physical weight. 6 months, she admitted finally, her voice so quiet I almost didn't hear it. 6 months. Half a year of lies, of sneaking around, of pretending everything was fine while she was betraying me behind my back. I felt the rage bubbling up, hot and uncontrollable. Do you even realize what you've done? To me? To our family? Or does that not matter to you? It matters, she cried, tears streaming down her face now. Of course it matters. I never wanted to hurt you. Then why did you do it? I don't know, she shouted, her voice breaking. I was unhappy, okay? I didn't know how to tell you. And then Eric, he made me feel seen. Seen? I echoed, my voice dripping with contempt. And what about me, Claire? Did it never occur to you to talk to your husband? Or was it just easier to run off and play house with someone else? She buried her face in her hands, sobbing. I stood, unable to sit still any longer. The anger, the hurt, the betrayal, it was all too much. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my tone cold and unyielding. You're going to pack a bag and leave. Go stay with Eric, or a friend, or a hotel, I don't care. But you're not staying here. She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. Please, don't do this. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. No, I interrupted. We're not fixing this. You made your choice, Claire, and now you're going to live with the consequences. She started to protest, but I held up a hand to stop her. If you won't leave, I will. But either way, we're done. For a moment, she just stared at me, her expression a mixture of shock and devastation. Then she stood slowly, nodding as if accepting some unspoken verdict. Fine, she said quietly. I'll go. As she disappeared into the bedroom to pack, I sat back down, staring at the papers on the table. The confrontation was over, but the fallout was just beginning. The house was eerily silent after Claire left. I stood at the window, watching her drive off, a hastily packed bag in the passenger seat. For a moment, I felt nothing. Just a hollow, empty space where my emotions should have been. But that didn't last long. Anger surged through me like a tidal wave, raw and uncontrollable. I wasn't just angry at her, I was angry at myself for not noticing sooner, for letting it get this far. And I was angry at him. Eric. A man I'd never met but already despised more than anyone else on the planet. It wasn't enough for her to leave. That was too easy. She had to understand the consequences of what she had done. I didn't want her to feel just guilt, I wanted her to feel the full weight of her betrayal. I sat down at the dining table with my laptop, determined to piece together every detail of her affair. Over the next few hours, I pored over bank statements, emails, and every bit of information I could find. Claire had been careful, but not careful enough. Her personal credit card was a goldmine. There were charges for expensive dinners at places I'd never been to, hotel stays that coincided with nights she claimed to be working late, and a string of purchases that reeked of deception. Then I turned my attention to Eric. A quick online search gave me more than I expected. Eric, it turned out, wasn't just some random coworker. He was her superior, a regional manager with a cushy salary and a reputation for being charming but arrogant. The more I dug, the clearer it became that their affair wasn't just a personal betrayal, it was a professional liability. If word got out, Eric's career would be on the line, and Claire's wouldn't be far behind. I decided that was my angle. First, I gathered evidence. Screenshots of the emails Claire had forwarded from my laptop, photos of the hotel charges, and a few choice messages from her phone's cloud backup, all compiled neatly into a folder. Next, I reached out to an attorney, someone I trusted to help me navigate the fallout. I didn't just want a divorce, I wanted it to be on my terms. That meant protecting my assets, securing custody of our children, and ensuring Claire didn't walk away unscathed. But that was just the beginning. I waited a few days before making my move. I needed time to think, to plan every detail. I didn't want to act out of pure anger, I wanted to be calculated, precise. When the time came, I started with her job. Using an anonymous email, I sent a copy of the evidence to the HR department at her company. I didn't embellish or add unnecessary commentary. I simply attached the files and wrote, "For your records. I believe this concerns a conflict of interest involving two of your employees." I knew they'd have no choice but to act. Workplace affairs, especially those involving a superior and a subordinate, were a public relations nightmare. Next, I turned my attention to Eric. I found his personal email through one of his social media accounts, carelessly linked to his professional profile, and sent him a message. This one wasn't anonymous. Eric. I know about the affair. I know about the emails Claire forwarded to you. And I know about the nights at the Grandview Hotel. I have all the evidence, and I've already shared it with HR. Consider this a warning. If I find out you've been in contact with her again, I won't hesitate to escalate things further. Stay away. James Asterisk. I didn't care if the email came off as a threat. In fact, I hoped it did. I wanted him to feel the same unease, the same gut-churning anxiety I'd felt the moment I realized what was happening. Claire was next. When she called later that week, asking if she could stop by to pick up some of her things, I agreed. But when she arrived, she was met with a stack of neatly packed boxes waiting on the front porch. "You're not coming in," I told her, my tone flat. She stared at me, her expression a mix of confusion and hurt. "James, we need to talk." "There's nothing left to talk about," I interrupted. "Your things are here. Take them and go." She hesitated, her eyes darting to the boxes, then back to me. "You can't just shut me out like this. I'm still your wife." "Not for long," I replied. "The papers are already with my lawyer. You'll be served soon enough." Her face fell. "James, please." "Stop," I said, my voice sharp. "You don't get to beg for forgiveness now. You had months to think about what you were doing, and you chose to keep doing it. I've given you enough chances." Tears filled her eyes, but I didn't care. She could cry all she wanted, it wouldn't change anything. "Oh, and one more thing," I added. "Your company knows. So does Eric. Don't expect things to stay quiet for long." Her eyes widened in shock. "What did you do?" "Exactly what you deserve," I said coldly. She left without another word, loading the boxes into her car and driving away. That night, I sat alone in the house that now felt like a stranger's. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. Claire's betrayal had torn my life apart, but I wasn't going to let it define me. This wasn't the end, it was the beginning of something new. The days following Claire's departure were quiet, almost unnervingly so. My anger had dulled to a simmer, but the questions wouldn't stop. I couldn't shake the thought of how everything had come undone so quickly. A 12-year marriage, built on what I thought was trust, had crumbled in the span of a few weeks. Then one evening, Claire called. Her voice was hesitant, almost fragile. "Can we talk?" she asked. I considered hanging up. Part of me didn't want to hear anything she had to say, but another part, a quieter, stubborn part, needed closure. "Tomorrow," I said curtly. "At the house. 8 o'clock. The next day, I spent the hours leading up to her arrival steeling myself for whatever would come. I wasn't going to let her manipulate the conversation or tug at my emotions. If she wanted to talk, she was going to have to face the cold, unvarnished truth of what she had done. At exactly 8, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Claire standing there, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. She was dressed casually, her hair tied back, her face devoid of makeup. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. She walked in hesitantly, her eyes darting around the house as though it was unfamiliar. I motioned for her to sit in the living room, and I took the armchair opposite her. "So," I said, breaking the silence, "what do you want to talk about?" She swallowed hard, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I need to explain. I need you to understand why." "I don't need explanations," I interrupted. "I need the truth. Why are you really here?" She flinched but nodded. "Fine. The truth is, I don't want us to end like this. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but I still love you, James. I want to fix this, if you'll let me." I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "You want to fix this? Claire, you didn't just make a mistake. You made a series of choices, calculated, deliberate choices, to betray me. You didn't care about fixing things when you were sneaking off to hotels or forwarding my emails to your lover. So why now?" Her eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't going to let her emotions derail the conversation. "Do you know what it's like?" I continued, my voice rising. "To find out the person you trusted most has been lying to you for months? To question every moment of your marriage and wonder if any of it was real? You don't just fix that, Claire." "I know," she said softly. "I know I hurt you. But it wasn't because I stopped loving you." "Then why?" I demanded. She hesitated, her gaze fixed on the floor. I felt invisible. Like I was just going through the motions, day after day, and you didn't see me anymore. I stared at her, incredulous. "So your solution was to have an affair? To destroy everything we built together because you felt invisible?" "It wasn't like that," she protested. "I didn't plan for it to happen. Eric and I." "Stop," I said, holding up a hand. "I don't want to hear about him. He's irrelevant now. This is about us, or whatever's left of us." Her lip quivered, and she looked up at me, her eyes pleading. "James, I'm not asking you to forgive me overnight. I just want a chance to show you that I'm sorry, that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn back your trust." I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms across my chest. "You think trust can just be earned back? Do you even understand what you've done? You didn't just betray me, you violated the foundation of our marriage. You humiliated me. And you put our entire life at risk for what? A fling? Validation? Whatever you were looking for, it wasn't worth this." She started to cry, but I didn't feel the sympathy I might have once felt. Her tears couldn't erase the pain she had caused. "So, what now?" she asked through her sobs. "Is this it? Are we really over?" I looked at her for a long moment, weighing my words carefully. "Yes," I said finally. "We're over. There's no coming back from this, Claire. I don't hate you, but I can't love you anymore. You destroyed that part of me." Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I almost felt pity for her. But I reminded myself of the betrayal, the lies, the nights I'd spent wondering what I'd done to deserve this. "You need to move on," I said firmly. "Find your own path, figure out who you are without me. And I'll do the same." She nodded, tears streaming down her face, but said nothing. After a few minutes of silence, she stood and walked to the door. "Goodbye, James," she whispered. I didn't respond. I watched as she walked out of the house and out of my life, shutting the door behind her. When she was gone, I sat back down, the weight of finality settling over me. The marriage was over, and with it, the chapter of my life I had once thought would last forever. But in its place was something else, a chance to rebuild, to start fresh. And this time, I wouldn't take anything for granted. The days that followed were strange. It was as though I was adjusting to life on a new planet, one where everything looked familiar but felt fundamentally different. The house was quieter without Claire, but it wasn't the peaceful silence I had hoped for. It was a heavy, oppressive quiet, filled with memories of arguments, laughter, and the betrayal that had shattered it all. I spent the first week packing away reminders of her. Clothes, framed photos, little notes she'd written me over the years, they all went into a box. Not because I wanted to forget her, but because I needed space to breathe. Claire wasn't my wife anymore. She was a ghost haunting the edges of my life, and I had to exorcise her presence if I wanted to move forward. Divorce proceedings started quickly. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Melissa, wasted no time filing the papers. I made it clear that I wasn't interested in dragging things out. I wanted a clean break, custody of the house, and a fair division of assets. Claire, to her credit, didn't fight me on any of it. Maybe she was too ashamed, or maybe she just wanted to be free of the mess she had created. Either way, the process moved faster than I'd expected. But paperwork was the easy part. The hard part was figuring out what came next. I spent hours sitting at the dining room table, staring at the blank notepad in front of me. What did I want from my life now? Who was I without Claire? These were questions I hadn't asked myself in years, and the answers didn't come easily. One evening, a week after Claire left, I found myself scrolling through social media, a habit I'd been avoiding since everything happened. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just mindlessly flipping through updates and photos. But then I saw her profile. Claire hadn't changed her relationship status or deleted any of the pictures of us together. It was like she was pretending none of it had happened, at least online. Her latest post was a photo of her at some park, smiling at the camera like everything was fine. It pissed me off. While I was here picking up the pieces of my life, she was out there acting like the past 12 years had been a minor inconvenience. I wanted to comment, to call her out in front of everyone, but I stopped myself. What was the point? She didn't deserve any more of my time or energy. Instead, I called my best friend, Greg. Greg had been in my life since college, and while we didn't see each other as often as we used to, he was the kind of friend who always showed up when it mattered. I hadn't told him about Claire yet. I wasn't ready for the pity or the inevitable barrage of questions. "Hey, man," he answered on the second ring. "What's up? Do you have time to grab a drink?" I asked. "Of course. Everything okay?" "No," I said bluntly. "But I'll explain when I see you." We met at a small bar downtown, the kind of place we used to hang out at before life got complicated with marriages and mortgages. Greg listened as I told him everything: the affair, the confrontation, the divorce. When I was done, he let out a low whistle. "Damn, James. That's a lot. Tell me about it." He sipped his beer thoughtfully. "What are you going to do now?" "That's the question, isn't it?" I said, leaning back in my chair. "I feel like I've been living someone else's life for years. Now I have to figure out who I am all over again." "Maybe that's not such a bad thing," he said. "I mean, yeah, it sucks that Claire cheated, but this could be your chance to start fresh. Do the things you've always wanted to do." I thought about that as I finished my drink. Greg was right. As painful as this was, it was also an opportunity. I didn't have to be the person I was before. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into rebuilding my life. I started by tackling the house. I repainted the walls, rearranged the furniture, and got rid of anything that felt tied to the past. It was exhausting but therapeutic. I also reconnected with old friends, people I hadn't seen in years because Claire and I had drifted into our own little bubble. It felt good to laugh again, to be around people who reminded me of who I used to be before everything got so complicated. Work became an anchor for me. I threw myself into my projects, not out of a need to escape but because it felt good to accomplish something tangible. I even picked up a new case, a pro bono project for a struggling nonprofit. It was challenging, but it gave me a sense of purpose. Then there was therapy. I'll admit, I was skeptical at first. The idea of sitting in a room and spilling my guts to a stranger didn't exactly appeal to me. But my lawyer, Melissa, insisted it would help, and for once, I listened. It wasn't easy. The first few sessions felt like tearing open wounds I'd been trying to ignore. But over time, I started to see things more clearly. The therapist helped me understand that Claire's actions weren't about me, they were about her. Her insecurities, her unhappiness. It didn't make what she did any less painful, but it made it easier to let go of the guilt I'd been carrying. By the time the divorce was finalized, I felt like a different person. Not completely healed, but stronger. Wiser. Ready to move forward. Claire and I had one last meeting at the lawyer's office to sign the final papers. She looked at me as we left, her expression a mix of regret and sadness. "James," she said, her voice soft. I hope you find happiness." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As I walked out of the building and into the crisp autumn air, I felt a strange sense of relief. The chapter was closed. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking back.